It all started during what was supposed to be a light-hearted night out. A double dinner date. 4 people, 2 couples, one upscale restaurant that most people would save up weeks just to afford. On the surface, it looked like a celebration of love and friendship. Underneath, though, the cracks were already forming. I was there with my fiancée, Stella. We'd been together 3 years, engaged for only a few months, with a wedding scheduled half a year down the line. Across the table sat my longtime friend Daniel and his girlfriend of 1 year, Chloe. The evening was meant to be an enjoyable escape. Steaks, wine, easy conversation. But sometimes, all it takes is one careless comment to shatter the illusion of stability. The conversation had drifted into playful territory. Celebrity crushes. Daniel mentioned an actress, and Chloe giggled, swatting his arm. It was typical couple banter, the kind of thing you'd expect when a little alcohol loosens tongues. Then it was Stella's turn. She leaned forward, locking eyes with the group, her lips curled in that smug smile she used when she wanted all the attention. "Oh, that's easy," she said, her voice carrying further than she realized, or maybe exactly as far as she wanted. "Jason Momoa. And I'm dead serious. If I ever met him, I'd leave this guy in a heartbeat." She jabbed her finger in my direction as though I were some kind of disposable placeholder. "Sorry, babe." "That's called trading up." The words hit like a slap. The table went silent, the kind of heavy silence that makes the clinking of glasses feel deafening. For a second, nobody knew whether to laugh, to scold, or to pretend it hadn't been said at all. And then Chloe erupted. A shrill, exaggerated laugh tore through the stillness. "Stella, you're awful. But honestly, same. A woman's got to have standards, right?" I sat frozen, bourbon glass in hand, staring at the fiancé I thought I knew. 3 years together, thousands spent on a venue, a ring that cost more than my first car, and here she was, declaring that our relationship was only valid until Aquaman walked into the room. It wasn't a joke, it was a revelation, and the look in her eyes told me she meant every word. Daniel didn't laugh. He set his fork down slowly, his jaw tightening. He turned to Chloe, his voice low but sharp. "You think that's funny?" She smirked, still giggling. "Come on, it's a joke. Don't be so uptight." "No," he replied, his gaze unwavering. "It's not. It's disrespectful. To your partner, to your relationship. What Stella just said wasn't funny. It was cruel. And you laughing at it only makes it worse." The mood at the table froze over, colder than the ice melting in our glasses. Stella shot him a glare. Chloe rolled her eyes and muttered something about sensitivity. I stayed silent, swirling the amber liquid in my glass, listening to the burn of Daniel's words that mirrored exactly what was echoing in my own mind. I finished my drink in a single swallow, set the glass down with a click that made all 3 of them look at me. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my wallet, and dropped crisp bills on the table, enough to cover everyone's dinner, plus a tip generous enough that the server would never forget it. Then I stood. "I think this evening is over," I said evenly. My eyes met Daniel's. "Need a ride home?" I didn't glance at Stella. Not once. The ride home was silent. Stella fumed, her voice rising in fits and bursts, accusing me of embarrassing her, of siding with Daniel, of lacking humor. I kept my hands on the wheel, my answers clipped to one word. By the time we reached her apartment, thank God she hadn't officially moved in yet, her frustration had boiled over into outright rage. "You're seriously going to give me the silent treatment all night," she snapped. "I'm tired," I replied. "We'll talk tomorrow." "There's nothing to talk about. It was a joke. You and Daniel are acting like children." "Okay," I said, just that one word. And it was enough to drive her into a frenzy. She slammed the door so hard the windows shook. I didn't watch her storm inside. I just drove away. My phone buzzed 20 minutes later. A number I didn't recognize. "Hey, it's Daniel. Sorry about tonight. Chloe acted like an idiot. Hope you're good." I pulled over, stared at the message, and felt a sense of clarity cut through the haze of bourbon and disappointment. "You have nothing to apologize for," I typed back. "You were the only one at that table making sense." "Beer tomorrow." The reply came instantly. "Absolutely." The next day, Daniel and I sat across from each other in a dimly lit bar that smelled faintly of old wood and history. No televisions, no noise, just 2 men who needed to talk. What started as casual conversation stretched into hours, peeling back layers of frustration neither of us had dared to voice until now. It turned out we weren't just two guys unlucky enough to be with the wrong women. We were living parallel lives. Daniel ran a successful contracting business, worked with his hands, and had carved out his own path. Yet Chloe constantly pushed him for more luxury, more expensive trips, a lifestyle he could provide but resented being used for. To her, he wasn't a partner, he was a bank account with a heartbeat. And Stella? My Stella? The joke about trading up was just the mask slipping. The little digs about money, the hints about bigger diamonds, the obsession with image. They weren't quirks. They were red flags I'd been painting white for years. At one point, Daniel leaned back, nursing his beer, and asked, "So, what now? Do we just cut them loose?" I shook my head slowly, a plan forming even as he spoke. "Too easy. They'll move on, find the next guy, and pull the same stunt. No lessons learned, no consequences. If they treat us like investments, then maybe it's time to show them what happens when the investors pull out." His eyes narrowed, then lit with understanding. "You're saying, we hit them where it hurts." "Exactly," I said. "Not out of spite. Out of clarity. They need to learn respect, the kind you can't teach with words." And so, a pact was made. That night, the operation began quietly, without fanfare. I logged into my bank account and canceled the supplementary credit card I'd given Stella. One quick click, and her spa days and shopping trips were over. Then I called the jeweler who'd sold me the 2-carat diamond engagement ring. I wasn't ready to say the word return just yet, but the conversation hinted at options. Daniel's move was different, but just as devastating. He'd been covering the rent for Chloe's upscale apartment. Her lease was set to renew in 2 weeks. Instead of co-signing again, he drafted an email to the property manager. As of the end of the month, he would have no financial involvement. We both sat back and waited. The first crack appeared within 48 hours. Stella called me, her voice laced with panic. "My card got declined at the spa," she hissed like it was my fault the world had suddenly betrayed her. "I was booking a facial for the bachelorette weekend." "What's going on?" "I canceled it," I replied calmly. "You what?" "Why would you do that? The wedding's in 6 months." "Is it?" I asked, my tone razor sharp. "From what I recall, it's conditional, pending a chance encounter with Jason Momoa. Why keep funding something that might not happen? Sounds like a bad investment." Silence. Long, weighted silence. Then she sputtered, "That was a joke? You can't be serious." "You're right," I said. "The venue's still booked, the vendors still lined up. The party is happening. Just not the one you're expecting." And I hung up. 2 days later, Chloe had her turn. She called Daniel in full meltdown mode, tears punctuating every word. "The landlord says I can't renew. I only have 2 weeks before I get kicked out. You can't do this. I can't afford this place on my own." Daniel's voice was steady, resolute. "If our relationship isn't long-term, why should my commitment to your apartment be?" "You'll figure something out. Good luck." The fallout came fast. Stella and Chloe realized quickly that this wasn't isolated punishment. It was a coordinated strike. They called, they texted, they screamed into voicemails accusing us of cruelty, of betrayal, of plotting. And they weren't wrong. We had plotted. Only we weren't the villains of their story. We were the reality check. When rage didn't work, they tried sympathy. When sympathy failed, they rallied their friends, hoping for an army of defenders. But Daniel and I had anticipated that, too. We sent calm, factual messages to our circles. "Just so you know, Stella publicly announced she'd dump me on the spot if she ever met Jason Momoa. I've decided to take her at her word. Wish her the best." Daniel sent his version about Chloe. The specificity made it undeniable. Our friends didn't side with them. In fact, most went quiet, embarrassed for them. They thought the money drying up was the main event. But in truth, it was only the appetizer. The real storm was yet to come. Her friends whispered behind my back, believing I couldn't hear. But I did. They said I was too patient, too forgiving, that I didn't see what was obvious to everyone else. Maybe they were right. Maybe I was too blind to admit it. Yet deep inside, I always knew. Every smirk, every backhanded comment, every look she gave when she thought I wasn't watching told me the truth I was too afraid to face. At dinner parties, she found ways to humiliate me without ever raising her voice. A simple roll of her eyes when I spoke, a dismissive laugh when I tried to add to the conversation, a sarcastic remark that made the others laugh while I sat there, forcing a smile. And when I confronted her later, she would always twist it around. "You're too sensitive." It was just a joke. Don't embarrass yourself by making it serious. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think I was overreacting, that maybe she was right. Maybe I was being insecure. But the truth was written on the faces of everyone else. They laughed at me, not with me, and she enjoyed it. There was one night I'll never forget. We were at a friend's house celebrating a birthday. She told everyone how I once tried to cook dinner and nearly burned the kitchen down. Everyone laughed hysterically, even though I had cooked for her countless times since and she loved it. She chose the one moment of my failure and made it the highlight of the evening. That was who she was. She thrived on keeping me small, and yet I stayed. Because every cruel word was followed by an apology, every humiliation was painted as just fun, and every insult was wrapped in the excuse of love. She would kiss me after the crowd dispersed, whisper that I was her everything, and I clung to those whispers as if they outweighed the wounds she left behind. But the balance was shifting. Slowly, I began to realize that love shouldn't feel like chains, that laughter shouldn't sting, and that someone who truly values you doesn't need to break you down to feel taller. I started noticing patterns. The way she compared me to others, not to inspire me, but to remind me of where I lacked. The way she always had the final word, even if it meant rewriting history. The way she thrived when I was uncertain but grew distant when I stood firm. She didn't want a partner, she wanted an audience. And the more I saw it, the less I could ignore it. The breaking point didn't come all at once. It arrived in fragments, like small cracks forming in glass until the entire surface finally shatters. One evening, we were getting ready to go out. She stood in front of the mirror, adjusting her dress while I waited by the door. Without looking at me, she asked, "Do you ever wonder why I'm still with you?" I froze. It wasn't a question. It was a dagger wrapped in silk. She didn't even glance in my direction, just kept fixing her lipstick, as if the words meant nothing. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, something shifted. Later that night, she introduced me to someone at the party as the guy who funds my lifestyle. Not as her partner, not as someone she loved, but as her sponsor. Everyone laughed, including her. And I laughed too, because that's what I had trained myself to do. Pretend it didn't hurt. Pretend I was stronger than the sting. But when the laughter faded, the words remained, echoing louder than the music around us. That was the moment I knew. If I stayed silent, I would lose myself completely. The next few weeks, I became an observer rather than a participant. I watched how she maneuvered conversations, how she thrived on belittling others, not just me. I saw how she measured her worth in attention, how she collected admiration like currency. It wasn't love she was offering me, it was performance, and I was nothing more than a prop in her act. I began reclaiming small pieces of myself, quietly, subtly. I stopped reacting to her provocations. I stopped giving her the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. When she mocked me in front of her friends, I simply looked at her, calm and unmoved, and that silence unsettled her more than any protest could. It was then that I realized power doesn't always come from shouting or fighting back. It comes from refusing to play the game at all. But walking away was not as simple as closing a door. It meant confronting years of conditioning, breaking free from the cycle of apology and forgiveness, and facing the fear of being alone. I had built my world around her, and stepping out meant stepping into uncertainty. Yet uncertainty was beginning to look less terrifying than the cage I had been living in. One night, I looked at her as she laughed at another cruel joke at my expense. For the first time, I didn't see the woman I once loved. I saw a stranger, someone who fed on weakness and mistook cruelty for strength. And in that moment, I realized I didn't love her anymore. I loved the idea of who I thought she could be. And ideas, I finally understood, can't keep you warm at night. The days leading up to the end were the hardest. Not because of her, but because of the voice inside me that whispered doubts at every turn. What if you're wrong? What if she really does love you, just in her own way? What if you never find anyone else? Fear was her greatest weapon, but it wasn't always her voice. It was mine. I had absorbed her cruelty so deeply that I began to speak it to myself. I told myself I wasn't enough, that I should be grateful anyone wanted me at all. And for years, that belief kept me bound to her like invisible chains. But chains, no matter how strong, can't withstand truth forever. And the truth was staring at me each day. I was miserable, broken down, a ghost of who I used to be. I remembered the person I once was before her, the one who laughed without hesitation, who spoke without fear of being silenced, who believed in himself without needing validation. That person wasn't gone. He was buried, and the only way to bring him back was to step away from the one who kept burying him deeper. So I began preparing quietly. I didn't argue with her anymore. I didn't explain myself. I didn't try to make her understand, because I knew she never would. Instead, I started saving pieces of myself for the future I was about to build. I packed small things little by little. Important documents, clothes I cared about, things that mattered. She didn't notice, too, wrapped up in her endless performance for others. I made plans in silence because silence was my shield now. There were nights I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, my chest heavy with both dread and anticipation. The thought of freedom filled me with hope, but the thought of confrontation filled me with fear. What if she tried to stop me? What if she manipulated me into staying again? But then I would remember her words, the ones that cut the deepest, the ones she never apologized for, and suddenly leaving felt less like betrayal and more like survival. The last straw came during another gathering. She made a joke about me, something cruel, something rehearsed, and the room erupted in laughter. But this time, I didn't laugh. I didn't smile. I just looked at her, expressionless, while everyone else tried to recover from the awkwardness of my silence. For the first time, she looked unsettled. For the first time, she didn't win. That night, as she slept soundly beside me, I stared at her and realized I felt nothing. No anger, no love, no sorrow, just emptiness. The kind of emptiness that isn't tragic, but liberating. And I knew the next day would be the last day I would ever wake up beside her. Morning came quietly, almost too quietly. Sunlight spilled through the curtains, painting the room in gold, but it felt nothing like warmth. I moved carefully, each step deliberate, each breath measured, as if the walls themselves might betray me. She was still asleep, her face turned away, serene and unbothered, as though the cruelty she carried in her waking hours never touched her dreams. For a moment, I watched her, wondering how two sides of a person could be so different. But that thought was fleeting, swallowed by the weight of what I had to do. I had rehearsed this moment in my mind countless times, what I would say, how I would leave, how I would refuse to be pulled back into her gravity. But when the time came, words felt unnecessary. Sometimes silence is the loudest declaration of all. I gathered the last of my things. The bag by the door was heavier than it looked, not because of its contents, but because of everything it symbolized. Years of swallowing pain, years of convincing myself I was loved when I was only being used, years of believing chains were something sacred. As I zipped it closed, the sound seemed to echo in the stillness. My chest tightened, but my hands didn't shake. Not this time. She stirred, mumbling in her sleep, but didn't wake. Part of me thought she would sense it, sense the moment she lost control over me. But she didn't. And maybe that was the greatest truth of all. She never really saw me, never really knew me. To her, I was only ever a role to be played, a resource to be tapped, a shadow to stand behind her glow. I placed my keys on the nightstand beside her. That was my final message. Unspoken, but undeniable. No arguments, no begging, no drawn-out goodbyes, just a quiet end to a story that should have ended long ago. As I stepped outside, the air hit me differently. Cooler, sharper, almost electric. For the first time in years, I felt something like freedom brushing against my skin. My lungs expanded as if they had been waiting for this moment, aching to breathe without restraint. The street was empty, the world still half asleep, and I realized how symbolic it was. A new day was just beginning, and so was I.